Hey, friends. Welcome to Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, co-parenting, and life transitions. I'm also a divorced mom of 3 now grown kids, a recovering lawyer, a Jewish educator, a mediator, an author, a spiritual counselor, and a divorce coach who is committed to transforming the divorce experience for everyone involved. Divorce is messy. You make the decision, or your spouse springs it on you, and you really don't know what's your next move. You have lots of options, but you may not feel like you do. I'm here to let you know there are different ways to begin the process. Of course, people generally think, I need a lawyer. But what if you could start a different way? What if there were a non-litigation oriented approach? Well, there is. First of all, coaching may be the best way to start. I really believe that finding that divorce coach that you relate to is your best first move. Because as your coach, I help walk you through the process from the crazy, should I or shouldn't I, to the how do I tell my spouse, to the what do I do next? How do I even start? And then in the messy middle, when everything seems to be happening at once or nothing seems to be happening at all, I help you get what you need when you need it. And then when you're done, I help you navigate the co-parenting process. So that's what I do. And that's what a coach does. But what if you didn't have to hire the lawyer first? There is something called mediation. And you might be asking, what is mediation and how is that different from litigation? So I'm going to share the definition. Divorce mediation is a voluntary process where a neutral third party, the mediator, helps the divorcing couple resolve their issues out of court. That's it, plain and simple. But of course, divorce, as in life, nothing is simple. And so that's why I titled today's session, Debunking Mediation Myths. Because we have a lot of fear surrounding divorce, and not using the tried and true method of litigation and hiring lawyers first might feel scary. But I want to let you know that it doesn't have to be, and you can be prepared. And one of my trainings is to prepare you before mediation so you go in with knowledge. But let's go back to the title of today's show, which is demystifying mediation or debunking mediation myths. Let's talk about those mediation myths and what you're afraid of. So I'm going to jump right in and tell you that some people worry that you can't mediate unless you get along. Now, that really is not the case. It might feel like the case, but it's not the case. I heard this morning on a podcast about disagreements and how do we dialogue around disagreements. The phrase adversarial collaboration. And in many ways, that's exactly what mediation is, adversarial collaboration. So what does it mean? It means that you and your co-parent may feel like adversaries. You and your co-parent may feel like it's kill or be killed and someone has to win. But I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to agree to be able to collaborate. And when you put your kids at the center and keep the kids in mind, you will recognize that conflict is not the thing that's going to get you to the end zone. And so let's figure out how we negotiate the conflict. So that's mediation. So to debunk the myth that you can't get along, you can't mediate unless you get along, I want you to know that many, many couples go through the process and they don't get along. And in fact, in many states, the court requires you to at least try mediation before you get to the trial phase. So that's one. You can do it, and it is possible. So another mediation myth. The mediator is like the judge. And if I'm going into mediation, I have to get the mediator to take my side. So let's go back to the definition of mediation. Mediation is a voluntary process where a neutral third party helps the divorcing couple resolve their issues out of court. Helps. The mediator does not decide. You decide. And I want that to sit with you. In mediation, you decide. And when you have the power to define your own future, you're going to get there faster and you're going to hold that agreement because it was your terms, not someone else's terms. So you don't have to get the mediator to take your side. You might need help facilitating a conversation where you're understood. And you actually want to understand your soon-to-be ex. Because if you can understand where each of you are coming from, you will find shared spaces where you can reach agreement. And that happens whether you get along from the start or whether you get along afterwards. You still are going to have shared spaces. And that's how the mediation process works. So it looks like our guest, Rachel Green, is here. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Lisa. Great to be here.
Great to have you. So in order to answer these questions on debunking mediation myths, I invited expert mediator Rachel Green to join us because she's been in the trenches for 30 years. So Rachel, I'd love to give my audience your background and then we can dig into it. I started before you got here answering a couple of questions.
I've been hearing what you've been saying.
Okay, great. So you can let me know if I'm right or wrong, but let me give your bio as we go.
Okay. You haven't said anything wrong that I've heard so far.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Rachel Fishman Green, Esquire. She founded Resolutions Mediation and Collaborative Divorce Services in 1995. She's a leading New York mediator, a former member of the board of directors of the Family and Divorce Mediation Council of Greater New York, and she's a founding member and co-director of their Domestic Violence Task Force, which is really significant. She chaired the Ethics Committee of New York State Council on Divorce Mediation for 21 years, and she's a frequent presenter on mediation ethics and domestic violence. Rachel has helped thousands of divorcing and separating couples resolve conflicts concerning all aspects of divorce, including division of homes, time with your kids, dividing small businesses, fair distribution of pension assets, child support, division of health and child care expenses, taxes, and how to bring new partners into your children's lives. Rachel is a friend and colleague, and I'm happy to have her on today's show. Welcome, Rachel Green.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to have a chance to talk to your listeners about mediation because it's a subject near and dear to my heart, and I believe passionately that it's the best option for the vast majority of people who are going through the restructuring of their family.
I 100% agree. 9 times out of 10, I direct my clients to mediation. Yeah. And often we are talking about mediation and the mediation process until we learn that maybe there's something that's really an obstacle to that happening. But we're still preparing for mediation the whole time by developing an understanding of what their situation is, which is part of the mediation process.
Right. And, it's interesting when you started and you said people think that they have to agree about everything. I mean, if people could agree about everything, they wouldn't need anyone to help them with their divorce. They could sit down at the kitchen table, write up what they agree to, sign it in the appropriate way, depending on what state you're in, and submit it to the court. But, most most couples who are splitting up are not communicating that well. And words are very imprecise tools, and it's easy to misunderstand things. And then I read somewhere that your brain can process 1,100 words a minute, but you can only speak about 100 words. So that means that 10% of what you're intending and what you're thinking about is what comes out when you speak, and the other 90% stays in your head. And a lot of times it's just human nature. You're feeling something, you're thinking something, you have no idea that the other person is not aware of what you're thinking. That's another reason that there's a lot of miscommunication, because sometimes one person says something and they may have the most benign intent, and then the other person hears it as an attack.
Yes. And that's part of people who enter the mediation space, people who are getting divorced, are very often in a high trigger state where they're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, because that's the nature of their relationship with their partner.
Right.
And they don't know how to take communication in a non-threatening way.
Right.
And so I believe that that's part of the power of mediation, because a mediator is the neutral and can hear things without the emotional backstory.
That's right. And, when I see that kind of thing, I can point it out to them. I mean, I can say, wait, hold on, let's slow down. What did you hear that the other person said? And they say, well, she said blah, blah, blah. And she says, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
And I say, okay, what did you intend him to hear, or her?
That's great. Yeah.
And and they repeat it, and it's like everybody goes, and the whole dynamic shifts, because he clarified that she wasn't trying to attack him. She was just trying to ask a question or raise an issue. I mean, people who are divorcing or separating are probably not communicating the best that they ever did in their whole relationship. They're at a point of crisis.
Yeah.
And having, a neutral third person in the room can kind of bring down the temperature and help them to focus on what they're trying to say. I mean, I had a couple who just their volume level was just up to here, everything. They couldn't talk like this. They just shouted every single thing. And it was, it was making me go like,
yeah.
and so I was able to just take a beat and talk softly, and it just helped calm them down so that they could focus on what we had to discuss.
That's huge, because we are guided by our mirrored neurons. So when we see someone else who's escalating, we escalate. That's part of human nature. That's the way we're wired. So having someone, a neutral third party, the mediator in the room, who can look at both of you and separate yourself from the escalation by remaining calm and speaking more slowly and taking breaks and setting guide rules, that's going to reduce the mirror neurons for both of them.
Yeah, that's very interesting that we instinctively want to mirror
the
emotions of the person that we're talking to. That's very interesting.
And it's really hard not to. So that's where, in my coaching and in my co-parenting work, I always talk about the power of the pause, that we need to take a breath. And when I work with couples, because I've been doing coaching in the mediation space, and I ask them to take a pause. I can say, I could see how the emotions are getting hotter in here. Let's breathe. And then we'll restate what's been going on.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing that I would add is that it's very, very normal that they feel this way. It's very normal that they wouldn't be human if they didn't care deeply about how they're dividing things after a long relationship, what's going to happen with their children, how often are they going to see them. There's so much going on, so much transition in every aspect of their lives. Of course, the emotions are going to rise up.
I love that observation that you just made, because what you find in mediation and the opportunities you find in mediation is that your mediator sees you as a person, not a product, right? Very often in litigation, you feel like you're just another case. And it's hard. It's hard. But this is your life. And when you're in the mediation room, it's you and the mediator and your spouse, and you're deciding the next chapter. And the mediator, you as a mediator, Rachel, you just said you acknowledge that this is hard.
Yeah.
You are struggling, and this is your life at stake.
Right. Well, I think people have a fantasy that the judge is going to be the wise father who they never had, who's
Right.
going to look at them and see their pain and their persistence and what they've put up with all these years and go, you poor thing. But the reality is far different from that.
Yeah.
Picture.
Yeah.
The court systems are very backed up, and the judges generally don't want to hear from the litigants. They don't want to hear from the couple themselves. They want to hear from the attorneys. The judges are just focused on the legal issues. They don't want to hear a story. They don't want to, I think partly they want to be impartial and look at the legal issues, and their analysis might be clouded if they hear your story. So they definitively do not want to hear your story.
Right. So what you're saying is that the idea of your day in court is a fantasy.
It's a
to use your word, it's a fantasy.
Yeah.
So let's get down to business and do it on your own. It's not, you need your day, but let's have your day in a meaningful and productive session, which would be in the mediation space.
Yeah. Yeah. And another fantasy that people have is, I'm going to give this to my attorney and he's just going to take care of it and it's going to be done. So why should I go to mediation where I have to sit in the room with my ex, either the Zoom or the virtual room or the actual room, and I have to figure out how to talk to him about these things. And if I could talk to him about these things, maybe we wouldn't be getting divorced. And that's hard. It's scary, and it's going to cost some money. And I don't want to do it. I'd rather give it to my attorney and just have him take care of it. And the reality is that the attorneys have a lot of other cases. They are mostly putting out fires, meaning, whatever case has a trial date in the next 2 weeks is the case they're focusing on. If you don't have a trial date for a year and a half, they don't want to hear from you. They're not going to do anything on your case until they have to. And a lot of times people tell me they can't get their attorney on the phone. They can't ask a question. They go to court and they sit in court for an hour and a half, and then the judge says, okay, all the rest of the cases are adjourned, put off for another 3 months, talk to the clerk and get another date. And, nothing happens. It takes a very long time.
Yeah. So, what you point out is that the system that we have doesn't work. The system for dissolution of marriage is not to benefit families. Like, making it harder doesn't make people decide to stay married. Making it harder just makes them more frustrated and disappointed. So mediation actually makes it easier.
Mediation does make it easier because you have much more control over the mediation process. I've had couples who want to come in once a week or twice a week because they're very eager to get things finished. A lot of times those couples have been separated for a year or 2 or 3, and there's some reason they want to get divorced now. Something's come up in one of their lives, and they're very motivated, and they come in and we knock it out.
Yeah.
And then there are couples who come in every 6 or 8 months, because they're on a slower time frame. Maybe they are not in a rush for the divorce because they separated already. They have a few things to work out. They come to mediation. We set the kids' schedule and child support, and then they are off living their lives and working and taking care of their kids. And the family, the couple, have control over the timing for the process, how many times we meet, how much they talk to each other or don't talk to each other between sessions. All of these things they can actually affect in mediation, whereas they can't have control over that at all in litigation.
Right. So what I want to reiterate is that you have control in mediation. You are the one making the decisions. You don't have to agree to anything.
Right. Agreement is in the word agreement. Agree.
Yeah.
You both have to agree. So you do have power that sometimes people feel like they don't have, because you don't have an agreement until you also agree with what the other person is putting forth.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement. And on that, we're going to take a quick break, a 30-second interlude to hear from our sponsor. And we're back with Rachel Green, who is a esteemed and very experienced mediator. And she's a trainer of trainers. And I'm so glad to have you. When we left, we were talking about you decide that in mediation, you're the one who gets to decide on the agreement. And you don't have a third party deciding. So,
right. You don't have a stranger wearing black robes.
Exactly. Who doesn't live your life, who doesn't know your kids, who could care less, and who hears a lot of stories and may just think it's violins, right? Like, enough with the violins. But it's your life. And it doesn't matter if they've heard this kind of story before, because it's your story and it matters. And in the mediation room, it's about your story and also about your next story, because you're not done. We were going to talk about some of the myths, and I wanted to ask you, what are common objections that you hear, and how are they just misperceptions?
Well, sometimes people feel that they can't mediate if they're angry. Mm-hmm. And I don't agree. What I have found is that anger is, what they call a secondary emotion. There's something underneath that has made you angry, and it has made you sad, or it's made you scared, or it's made you feel that somebody's taking resources from you. And what I have found is that anger is a clue that there's some need that the person has that is not being met. So if we can go underneath the anger and figure out what is that need, then we can start to talk about, well, how, can that need be met? How? What are the options? So anger can be a very useful clue in mediation that there still is something that we need to talk about that hasn't come out yet.
I love that. In my co-parenting work, we talk a lot about anger as a cover emotion, because it's covering the need that's underneath it. And you just, you reiterated that with such clarity. I really appreciate that, because it's like, what is the anger there to teach me? What is it telling me?
That's right.
And what you may find is that underneath the anger, you both have the same fears. And so then you have a shared language.
Exactly. That's beautifully put. The anger is a clue, and it can lead us to figure out what each person really needs in order to move forward to this next phase of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And so maybe you actually need a little anger to
Right.
have effective mediation.
Right.
Because
I mean, I find that with beginning mediators, a lot of times when emotion starts to rise, they have the impulse to say, okay, shut it down, quiet. And I said, no, we want to do the opposite. We want to go where the strongest emotion is. We want to go right there and figure out what's going on and what's triggering that emotion.
so I love that. And this is not therapy. This is like life work. And I want people to also understand that like you're not going into mediation to therapize each other or to accuse each other or to label each other. You're going into mediation to acknowledge that you both have real big emotions.
But
And
people often are afraid of their emotions too, and that's where working with a coach can be very useful.
yeah,
And it's with you they would have a chance to explore, why am I feeling this way so much now? What can I do to help me have an outlet to vent and get this out of my system so I can go back and be more effective in mediation? Because I now realize, because I got so angry, I now realize this is very important to me, but how can I effectively communicate it without screaming and throwing
right.
something out the window? And
There were some clients that I work with, and they talk about how angry they are. They talk about their angry behavior, I will say, and I might ask them, "How is that working for you? Like, is that getting you what you need?" So, what do you think? How can we reframe your behavior or your mindset? It's really a mindset shift in order for you to be able to get what you need. And that's the beginning of altering communication patterns. Because once they understand what's underneath their current communication pattern, then they have the ability to have that shift.
right.
They can have a different conversation.
Right. And that's like another very powerful thing that can happen sometimes during mediation, that I love to watch, when there's a couple who perhaps they've been together for 18 years, and then suddenly one of them shifts the way they're speaking, and it just changes the whole room, because they've been locked into a pattern, but those patterns can only continue if both of them continue the patterns.
Right,
And
right.
when one of them stops playing the game, and then
Yeah,
it's like suddenly changes the whole conversation.
right. So one of the things we say, again, in the co-parenting work I do, is it only takes one person to shift, and that will shift the whole dynamic. And when you're negotiating money issues, parenting issues, where you're going to live, these are high value issues that trigger high value emotions. But if you can shift your perception of it and recognize that your spouse similarly has high value connections to those things, then maybe you can take that breath and reframe how you speak to each other.
Yeah. Well, and I find that many people, I mean, certainly the majority
Yeah.
of people who come into my office are very much on the same page about their children.
That's great. I mean, you specifically say, "Keep the kids in mind." That's your
That's the
podcast.
podcast, right?
Right? And that's, for us, that's really a key, because if that's like the Simon Sinek why. Like, why are you here?
Right.
What's your real goal? What's your purpose? And I'm using all the language from the co-parenting work I do called BEH2O, which is you start with the why, and that will help you stay grounded every time that conflict hits. Let's really go back to some of these myths. I mean, I love this conversation. We could talk for a very long time. But tell me more about, those clients who seem like, or who came to you and thought this will never work. How did that shift? Or have you seen those kinds of shifts?
I certainly have seen those kinds of shifts. Sometimes they're just very skeptical because they feel despair.
Hmm.
of having tried for years to communicate and just not having success. And then it reinforces their feelings that it can't work. But what I've found is that if they keep coming back, solutions start to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple who had, they had a lot of conflict around what school their child was going to attend. But that's a conflict that has an expiration date, because the child eventually had to be enrolled in one school or the other. And they did reach agreement because they knew that they had this expiration date. And I think we met 3 times in 6 weeks. And finally one of them convinced the other, and they both did research and they did interviews of school staff, and they, every time we met, there was a little bit more information to add to the puzzle, until it really was clear that one school was a better match for their child, and they ended up agreeing. And
that's a great example, because it shows that you can be on opposite ends, but once you start adding information, then you both have new tools.
Right, because for people who are having trouble communicating, a lot of times it's, 139 or the Waldorf school. Is it 139 or is it the Waldorf school? And that's how the fight goes. Waldorf, 139, Waldorf, 139. And that's all that's being said. And so it becomes this like power struggle almost. They're standing there at opposite ends and pulling. It's a tug of war. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's like I have to win because they both want to win and they can't hear anything else. And just for the audience that isn't in New York, 139, it's PS, Public School 139. So that's what we're talking about.
But it became less of a tug of war and more about, the actual, what would the experience of the child be? I was able to shift them in their focus. And then we said, well, we need this information. And then, they both agreed to go visit the schools together and to talk to, these personnel at this school and those personnel at that school. And
that's really wonderful. That's really collaborative, and it's creative, because often you go into a space where you're in disagreement and you think one of us has to win and get our way, or why does she always get her way, or why does he always get his way? But if you as the mediator can share, that's not how this works. This is about finding the right solution for the family.
Right. I recently had another couple arguing over furniture in their vacation home. And the husband was buying out the wife's share of the home. And she wanted to come and do a walkthrough. And he said, there's no need for you to do that. You don't ever have to go. There's nothing there that's yours. So she mentioned a couple of items. And he said, oh, yeah, that is there. Okay. And, 3 days later, he sent an email to her, which he copied me on. And just because she had mentioned those few things, he started thinking, oh, I thought there was nothing there that was hers. But, those 3 things are hers. He walked through the whole house. It was 3 pages inventory of everything that they had purchased. They owned the house with some other family members.
Yeah.
So, but everything that they had purchased as a married couple, he did this detailed list, and she felt that she didn't have to go there in person, which he didn't want. He was trying to establish this as his space now.
Yeah.
And try to excise the memories of her. And he didn't want her going to the house again. But because, again, it wasn't just, I want to go to the house, you can't go to the house. I want to go to the house, you can't go to the house. I don't want you to go to the house. I want to go to the house. to get them off of that and onto what's in the house, what are the things you're thinking about that you want to take. He came up with this really generous list. I mean, he wasn't saying, I'll give you all of this, but he was saying, here's the list. What are the things you want?
But it was a way to meet both of their needs, right? She wanted her stuff. He didn't want her on his turf. Those were their lines in the sand, right? Exactly. So once she said, but wait a second, what about these three things? And he realized, okay, maybe there's more. And what also I'm hearing is that he also had an awareness that maybe he doesn't want her stuff in his house. So it was also in his interest to go through and take a look. And the result was something they both could live with.
Right.
So it wasn't my way or the highway. It was, wait a second, what's underlying my way? What's underlying your way? How do we find, the alternate path, right? The detour.
Right.
So thank you so much. We have so much more to talk about. We didn't debunk all of the myths, but we did make it clear that mediation is such a powerful way to resolve your divorce because you decide. And when you have the wise facilitator neutral who can help you see things with a different eye, in a new perspective, then you have someone who really has your best interest at heart. So it's not, my perspective has always been that a mediator is not a neutral. A mediator is really the advocate for your family and your future. So you care about both of them. It's not that you care about neither of them. And I just want to put that out there. So thank you so much, Rachel. Can you share with my audience how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. You can reach me at Rachel at mediate2resolution.com. That's the number 2. And then you can also go to my website, mediate2resolution.com, and there's a contact us button there. So you can click that and send an email. It also has our phone numbers, so you can give a call. And happy to speak to any of your listeners. And if they mention that they heard this podcast, I will give them a free initial consultation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have you on. You have so much wisdom and experience, and you've seen it all. And every new family is a different iteration.
That is true.
But because you have these tools of knowing how it can be different, you have a perspective that makes mediation less scary.
I hope that's true, because it is my hope to hold their hand and guide them through finding the stepping stones to get to this next phase of their lives. And as you said, it's not over. It's just going into a new phase.
Yeah, you're still a family. You just have a different structure.
Right.
So thank you again, Rachel. I so appreciate it. Every conversation is great. And I welcome you back when we have an opportunity.
Thanks, Lisa.
For my audience, you can find me at lisa@lzlcoaching.com. The website is lzlcoaching.com. And that's it for today's episode of Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter. See you next time.